This podcast is part of the Game and Entertainment Network. Visit tgenetwork.net to find the latest episodes from all our shows.
This is Braxwolf Storm Chaser and the Pork Chop Express, and I'm talking to whoever's listening out there. Just remember what old Braxwolf does when the earth quakes and the poison arrows fall from the sky and the pillars of heaven shake thanks to some minor event in MMO land getting blown completely out of proportion. Yeah, Braxwolf just looks that big old poop storm right square in the eye and he says, "Give me your best shot, pal, I can take it." Furthermore, when some big-mouthed, control-freak, min-maxing raid leader inspects your tune, fish slaps your favorite man-head number 12 up one side and down the other, and he looks you crooked in the eye and he asks you if you paid your dues, you just stare that prepubescent button masher right back in the chat box, and you remember what old Braxwolf always says at a time like that. Have you paid your dues, Brax? Yes, sir, the check is in the mail.
You're listening to Beyond Bossfights, gaming conversations with interesting people. And now, here's your host, Braxwolf.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Beyond Bossfights. I feel I need to explain the intro to the episode a little bit. So, last night I pulled up one of my old childhood favorite movies on Netflix called Big Trouble in Little China. It's kind of a parody martial arts movie from the early 80s starring Kurt Russell. And the opening scene of that movie, he's driving his truck down the freeway, and he's talking into his CB radio, as all truckers have, or at least had at that time. And he's saying just all these ridiculously, hilariously macho things into the CB. And I was thinking to myself, the comedy of that situation, you know, Kurt Russell shouting into the night, hoping somebody was listening to him. And then I realized that's actually kind of what I do, too, when I'm podcasting. So thank you, Kurt Russell, for being the first podcaster in Big Trouble in Little China. Secondly, I've been kind of silent lately, and I wanted to give everybody a update on what's going on with podcasting. Some of it's kind of been out of my control. I've been sick for the last 2 weeks, trying to kind of preserve my voice for when it's a little bit better representative of what everybody's used to. But also, obviously, you know, the format of the show has kind of changed. And you might have noticed that I called this a Beyond Boss Fights, even though it's going to be a shorter episode and just myself once again. Well, that's kind of what it's going to be like moving forward. I've decided it's kind of silly to have all kinds of different names for the shows that I put into my feed. I'm going to go ahead and change the format of Beyond Boss Fights. This is episode 24. I was hoping to get to 24 episodes with the interview format, but it's just not moving fast enough for me to be able to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and release this as episode 24 of Beyond Boss Fights. Any of my shorter solo episodes are going to continue to be Beyond Boss Fights after this. All of the podcasting coaches will tell you that you need to be consistent with your format, and I kind of beyond that at this point. I'm not going to be making any money on this show. This is not going to be my livelihood. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do basically whatever I want. So I reserve the right to also have longer form interview shows in the future when I get around to doing it. But for the most part, the format of the show is now going to be me speaking into the void a la Kurt Russell in Big Trouble in Little China. So what's been going on? I think if you've been following me on Twitter and even possibly on the podcast, you know that I've been playing a lot of Fallout 4 recently, and even when I was playing Marvel Heroes as an MMO for my last year or so of MMO playing, I played it mostly as a single-player game. I don't think I went on a single group content type of run with anybody. I pretty much just leveled up my tune in my story and occasionally hitting, you know, a multiplayer area where there happened to be other players, but we weren't really playing together. So, needless to say, I've kind of moved into this area of gaming where single-player games is really my preferred way of gaming. And I started thinking about some of the reasons for that, because obviously there has to be a reason that I'm drawn to this type of game now when I played MMO games for a good 3 or 4 years. And I think there's really a few reasons that stand out in my mind. First of all, MMOs have gotten to the point where, especially the ones that actually require you to group up and do things, in kind of the old-fashioned sense, where you have to go on a group instance or raid or something like that, it's so difficult to coordinate this. Lior tweeted out a cartoon about this last week that just kind of made me laugh, and a lot of people I think it resonated with, where everybody was kind of raising their hand saying, I'm an MMO player, I'm an MMO player. And, you know, the kind of the punchline of it was, when do we want to play? And everybody kind of raised their hand and said a different day. And somebody said, no, that one doesn't work for me. And it just became it's become such a difficult thing to do, to get everybody together at the same time to complete some kind of content. And, I guess the alternative to that is, the random grouping, which is something that I've never really been a fan of. So why do something that you don't enjoy, right? So I've avoided random grouping, and on the other side of things, it's been really difficult to get people together that I know to do things. So what happens is I usually sit around and don't complete those things, which sometimes are required for advancement of your character or the story or whatever. So that's one thing that I don't have to worry about doing single player games at all. Another thing that kind of struck me the other day was that there seems to be much less drama around single player games from the community standpoint, and I know that there's still contention and there's still people that get upset about things, but it's a little bit different because single player games are more able to accommodate multiple levels of players, I think, than multiplayer games are. You take Fallout 4, for example. They just came out with a survival mode for Fallout 4. I guess survival mode existed before, but they revamped survival mode, and it's much, much more difficult now. You can't save your game in between, like for checkpoints, unless you find a bed to sleep in, and all of the bullets and things that you're kind of used to not weighing anything now have a little bit of weight to them, so you have to be very careful about the resources you carry with you, and it's just a much different twist on the game. It makes it much more difficult. Someone like me is probably never going to play that level of difficulty because I'm more in it for the story and the character progression and all that kinds of stuff. I'm not in it for a challenge, while some people are. It's really tough to do that in an MMO, to present multiple levels of challenge when everybody's in the same persistent world. Usually when they make a change to the game changes for everybody. So it's very tough to find that balance between challenge and casual players, which is why there's this tug of war and there's always this kind of drama, surrounding multiplayer MMO games where certain groups of players want to play it one way and certain groups of players want to play it the other way, and then there becomes animosity between groups within the same game. I haven't really noticed that too much while playing Fallout. People have been pretty much, I wish Bethesda would have done something different here and there, but there doesn't seem to be this real animosity. There's more of a brotherhood of, yes, we are all Fallout fans and we all love to play this game together. So, well, not together, but at the same time, separately. And lastly, I know this isn't really the case for all single-player games, but in Fallout it works just fine. I don't actually have to have a constant connection to play Fallout 4. Whereas with Lotro, I always had to be constantly connected to the internet, and if there was some kind of a snafu somewhere, whether it be on my system or on the internet or at Turbine, there was times when the game went down. Very, very seldom does a single-player game actually go down. Now, it does crash your system, but really the client of an MMO can crash your system too, so I don't really count that as an additional minus there for single-player games. It just, it's always, it's great to have the big multiplayer experience where there's tons of other people playing around you, but that requires so much more additional complexity than a single-player game that you can just load up on your computer, set your graphical settings accordingly, and just roll. You could turn your modem off if you wanted to and play Fallout 4 on your PC. So it's nice not to have that dependency in place. And in MMOs, it's not just the connectivity that's required. Sometimes the connectivity is there, but it's not good enough because of traffic conditions or ping times or whatever else that slows your frame rate down, or that causes lag. Anything that causes lag can decrease your experience, and that happens more often than not. I'd say probably, Lotro's a bad example because it's glitchy anyway, even with just the client side. I think is kind of hitchy, but I'd say at least half the time there was some kind of lag going on in Lotro, and it's got to be worse for the European players who have to go all the way across, the cables under the ocean to to get to the server. That's just asking for trouble when your server's that far away from your client. So anyway, those are just a few things that pop into my head. Thank you for listening. I just announced on Twitter a few minutes ago that Beyond Boss Fights has gone over 10,000 downloads, and that was as of last month sometime. So I want to thank all of my listeners and anybody who interacts with me. If you want to get a hold of me, you could follow me on Twitter at Braxwolf. That's BRAXWOLF. You can find my blog at braxwolf.com. You know, the podcast is on iTunes and Stitcher and Player FM and just about anywhere else that'll pull in an iTunes library. So thanks again for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time.